For the soldier, it's all about getting the mission done. It's meeting the mission, whether it's in the back of the pickup truck or whether you've got some great technology there in front of them. They're going to make the mission happen. We've got, AIDP, we've got maybe the smart systems, we've got all this technology that's proliferating the battlefield. We're always trying to improve the foxhole. I think we're just on the cusp of figuring out what AI can do for us. We're just in the beginning stages of learning everything that we can potentially use artificial intelligence for. Technology is moving so fast, we can't keep up with everything. People actually want to help more than just making a lot of money. They want to contribute to national security. The big primes can't move as fast as the Army needs them to move. Smaller companies and startups can do that because they're hungry.
Welcome to Defense Disrupted. My name is Ian Kalin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Turbine One. And we are joined today on the pod by two wonderful gentlemen. Honestly, I'm a little nervous because I admire these folks so much. I'm giddy with excitement to ask them questions here. We are welcomed by friend of the pod, retired Lieutenant General Bob Ashley, and one of his close friends, retired Lieutenant General Tony Hale. Bob and Tony, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Ian.
Hey, and it's great to hear it again. Yeah, and good to do this with Tony. So looking forward to the discussion. This is always fun.
I mean, I'm excited, but I'm also intimidated because not only by your careers and your experiences, which I am a student of, but because you know each other so darn well. I'm asking myself the question, why the hell am I even here? I just want to watch you guys battle it out for a little bit. So to get things started, and as a form of introduction, I'm going to throw a little blood in the water. So you two gentlemen have decades of military intelligence experience, front lines, senior leadership all over the world. You've mentored generations of folks that continue being servants of national security for intelligence. So let me throw a little intel question your way to get things started. On September 26th of this year at Carter-Finley Stadium, the North Carolina Wolfpack team are going to go against the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Intel has provided a 8-5 win-loss prediction that the Wolfpack's going to take it. So, Tony and Bob, based on your military intelligence, which team is going to win on September 26th?
Oh, Tony, go first, then I'll close it.
Bob, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Well, so look, there's an old thing with John Madden, if people are old enough to remember when he did NFL Today, and Chris Berman, they'd say that's why they play the game, irrespective of all the predictions. And so, quick snippet, 45-second story, 2007, I'm actually tailgating at an NC State game with Tony when Little Appalachian State, a Division II team, gets invited up to Michigan to get their butts kicked. In 2007, they go to the Big House and they pull off the all-time upset that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So, irrespective of predictions, you got to play the game. And so this will be a lot of fun because Tony and I will tailgate together at that. But good, healthy competition. Nobody gets hurt. And I want it to go down to the last possession. And of course, I want that last possession to be in App State's hands.
So, Ian, I remember that game in 2007 like it was almost yesterday. So I had been in Iraq for 2.5 years up until February of 2007. So it's the first football season I'm going to in 3 years. And we're in the parking lot. You should have seen Bob running back and forth to this pickup truck who had this 56-inch TV on the back of it. And when they won, he goes...
And a dish on top.
And so when App State wins, he goes running back to our tailgate areas to let Barb know that App State has won, and his hands are up in the air, and he's full of excitement. But to Bob's point, on any given Saturday, any team can win. And I will tell you, it doesn't matter who's playing. Any in-state rivalry in North Carolina, it's always up for grabs. I'm sure the Wolfpack will be favored, but we got to play the game. So one fact is for sure, and I can bet on that. We will win the tailgate.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me entertain that question. Although I will say, at the risk of criticizing my mentors, neither of you actually answered the question of which team is going to win. That's a very Intel thing that to like, well, let me give you the context, and if this, it's a conditional answer. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'll take that. But let's extend the metaphor a bit. Frankly, I can't help but think about that story of a TB on the back of the pickup truck, and think about what I've seen in the field personally with some of America's warfighters and allies. While at least in some parts of, I'll say, I don't know, UCOM, there's definitely stuff on the back of a pickup truck doing our nation's work. There's a bizarre similarity to some of those stories to some of the actual work that you've done and led in many places. So maybe that's a good transition as you yourself have served, both you gentlemen, in so many frontline places. Um, how much have things changed over the past few decades for the pickup trucks of the field? If you can maybe share, for those that don't know you both as well, some of your early experiences, and we'll really focus on Tony if we can, because Bob had a chance to share some in a previous party here. How have you seen that change over time? What are the trends that you're seeing now for the pickup trucks of today's soldiers?
Yeah, so that for me, that's a great question, Ian, and it really goes back to what I would say was my first deployment, and it was going across the Sava River in January of '96, going into Bosnia, and it was a peacekeeping mission. And then, fast forward 18 months later, going into Kosovo before combat operations, started in after 9/11, and everybody evolves. Everything evolves. And for the soldier, it's all about getting the mission done. It's meeting the mission. And so they make it happen, as you say, whether it's in the back of the pickup truck or whether you've got some great technology there in front of them, they're going to make the mission happen. And so from my time, September 11th, 7 years and about 2 months deployed since then, it was about adapting the mission every step of the way. No matter how long you were deployed, you always wanted to continue to improve the foxhole, and whatever capability there was to do that, that's what you wanted to do so that you could provide the best intelligence to your commander. And as I was looking at all the information about the podcast today online that Jamie sent, I started thinking about, D6A and where D6A was a long time ago when it first came out, and how soldiers didn't like to use D6A because it was so complicated. And that evolved over time. Some people were masters of D6A, but most of the intel soldiers kept D6A in a box in a corner in their TOCs. And now, of course, we've got, AIDP, the Army Intel Data Platform. We've got Maven Smart Systems. We've got all this technology that's proliferating the battlefield. And it goes back to my point of we're always trying to improve the foxhole of whatever will work. We will try it to give the best intel to our commanders. So it's evolved tremendously. And I think for me, as I mentioned at the Fuse event, a couple of weeks ago out in Tempe, I think we're just on the cusp of figuring out what AI can do for us. And there's going to be so much more in my mind, because we're just in the beginning stages of learning everything that we could potentially use artificial intelligence for. And for me, I go back to, you have to keep a human on the loop, not in the loop, but on the loop for intel, to make sure that we are following laws and regulations, and we make sure our collateral damage estimates are not violated and things like that.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. It makes me think a little bit about how the evolutions of systems how systems have evolved over time. And we have a rare opportunity here with multiple guests to ask a triangle type question, if I may. So for those that don't know the details of Bob and Tony's extraordinary careers, they, DAG2, Department of the Army, Head of Military Intelligence, I'll use common language to say, led a whole lot of intel stuff for the Army and Joint Forces. Bob had many roles in his years of military service, as did Tony, and they kind of overlapped a little and had similar jobs at different times. So, with that being an unfair summary, Tony, here's your opportunity on the record to look at Bob and say, Bob, I inherited some things from you, Bob. The question to you, Tony, what's the best thing you inherited from Bob? And what's the worst thing you inherited from Bob for some of those modernization systems? Can we blame Bob for DCGS today? Is that fair or is that unfair?
I think that's very unfair to blame for you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so don't do that. We won't
We
do that.
won't call out who may be the blame for D6A.
So when I became the G2, the things Tony talked about, D6 was cumbersome. It was complicated. And so I sat down with Rob Collins, who's now the G8 Senior Military Advisor and Acquisition. And I said, this is not going to deliver what we need. And we reset it. So maybe one of the things that Tony might say is a good legacy for me is I reset the program that is now allowed to recompete that has become AIDP. So I will gratuitously take credit with Rob Collins for doing that.
I would say, and Bob probably remembers this story. So Bob's a good team builder, okay? And it doesn't have to do with technology. It's about the team. So inheriting good teams, okay, whether it was in a special mission unit, whether it was in Joint Special Operations Command somewhere. I replaced Bob downrange in 2003, 4 for him to come back and change command, 2004 for him to come back and change command out of a special mission unit. And so I inherited good teams. But sometimes, and Bob will remember this, he is so calm and collected. Something happened in the unit. I rushed into his office. He and Jimmy Brown were in there. Another leader in the organization were in there just having a conversation. And, it was something really important. And Bob just sits back and goes, okay. And I'm like, dude, you got to get excited. And there was no excitement at all. It's just even keel. He didn't change he didn't change his demeanor or anything. It was just even keel. And I was like, man, you got to get excited. I mean, I was excited. I had emotion going on and just even keel. So sometimes I wanted to see that excitement or, see him like just vent a little bit, but nope, even keel.
It's amazing. I don't have that skill either, by the way. But I mean, Bob knows this with me already. I get too carried away in some of these things. Maybe as more.
Do you remember, Bob, the time you were sitting in the office behind the desk at the unit, and I'd come in and something's going.
Well, yeah. So the other guy that was with Tony was Jimmy Brown, who was our S4, and he was just as animated, just excited, and probably. And it was maybe 15 years later, Jimmy and I were talking, and he was recounting the story. And he added one thing to it, which he said, well, I'll always remember is you said something to the effect is don't ever misinterpret my lack of excitement for a failure to understand the criticality of what you've just conveyed to me. I got it. So we're going to work it.
Oh my goodness. That was the question to Tony. Maybe I should share the same to Bob. And feel free, Bob, to ask questions to your old friend here. I consider you, Bob, a co-host on today's event. The veteran status that you have, being on these for so long, I'm happy to turn the floor over, and I will in a minute have you ask some questions of Tony for this opportunity. But I guess I should, in balance, ask you the same question. Having separated transition from military service sooner than Tony did earlier, the different vintage, what did you see with admiration towards Tony's leadership when he was still in uniform and still in the seat? And perhaps some things that we wanted him to do more of, perhaps. Anything that you can, in balance, say that you, on reflection, when Tony had the roles that you once had?
Tony was my operations officer in that scenario that he just talked about. So when I was a lieutenant colonel, he was a major. He worked for me. And I was asking before, because I didn't really know him before he came into the 3 job. And I asked Charlie Cleveland, which is a good friend of ours, I said, tell me about Tony, because I'd only met him at his company command departure award ceremony. And what Charlie said was, I don't know how to put it any other way than Tony gets stuff done. And clearly he was, because I was deployed really the the last year, and the year that you were the 3. And so the lifeline back to the squadron, which is a very complicated organization. Tony ran masterfully while I was downrange because that was my task, was to go forward, both to Iraq and Afghanistan, 6 months each in that last year command. But, I would, even through all the years, and we've stayed in close contact, it's always been his ability to get things done. And so that's why I was, so excited when he was going into the Army G2. And I think my question for Tony is, um, your impressions of AIDP and that evolution, and how you tackled that as you came on board, because it was really just getting to the point where it was picking up steam. And because when I left, we were in increment 1, and we were doing the selection, and I think, it was Palantir was one of the competitors, and I can't remember who the other one was, and they were kind of in a, cook-off to who was gonna get it. We know the answer to that question now, but it really was. I was taking a look at this, for me, one of the biggest lessons learned is no nefarious actors in this, but we really had to have a come to Jesus moments to go, this is not gonna deliver what we need. As Tony said, it sits in the box. It takes, 8, 9 hours to set this thing up. And look how mobile we have to be now, and what we're seeing in Ukraine. This never would have gotten us there. And so I'm glad where we are now. And Tony's been able to shepherd this thing going forward. And the thing that I really appreciate is holding our industry partners to task, which I know he has done that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I would say that to Bob's question there about the Army Intel data platform, when I came in, and Bob will recall this, as the Army G2, I did a 45-day assessment, and I included everyone, not only the active component Compo 1, but Compo 2, the Guard, and Compo 3, the reserves, and I included everyone. And I included what I called all of the Intel senior leaders, which I said were lieutenant colonel, commander, or G2 and above. And we had multiple VTCs. I did in-person sessions. I talked to our senior SCSs. And one of my big rocks, one of the key items in modernization at Echelon, was to get AIDP on the right track. And we had a lot of units that wanted to field AIDP, but some people were hesitant. But as soon as units fielded AIDP, everybody wanted it. So, I got a call one day, and it was from your co-host, and he says, you might want to think about engaging industry a little bit more, bring them in, open up the door, and, have great conversations with them. Just don't be hesitant to engage industry. So I took that to heart. I went to Palantir and sat down with Aki and Sham and had Carp come to my office, and I said, hey, look, here's what we got to do. And I laid out what everyone had told me about the system and what needed to be done. And, then the Army moved to soldier touch points. And I believe that the soldier touch point has been the key, at least in the last 18 to 24 months, of making sure that soldiers, the user, is bought in to the system. And it won't sit in the corner, in the TOC, in the box, and it'll get out and be operational because the user had some input on what they needed and how they wanted to see it. And maybe it's a toggle here or a button there, because it's just not about buttonology. So I did that, and I had a quarterly engagement, and then started to meet with a different vendor every quarter. Some of the engagements were really good. Some of the engagements I had to say, hey, look, guys, you have wasted the Army's money, and here's what I calculate you have wasted. And a lot of them, a couple of them didn't like that I told them, hey, look, here's how you wasted our money, and I don't appreciate that, And, I went to Wichita, Kansas, where Bombardier rolled out the first Hades aircraft, the high altitude detection exploitation system. And the vice president of the company who was there to cut the ribbon says, here's what this aircraft costs to be built. And I looked at him and I'm like, I'm paying a whole lot more than that. And then I found out, I ran the traps and found out where all this extra money was being charged from. And I went back and said, hey, look, no wonder the chief is upset. The aircraft actually cost X and you're charging Y. And there was a big delta in there. I won't say that on the net here because, we had to cut that down. And so engaging industry partners and actually just being honest with them, I found was really rewarding, and actually both parties, could understand each other better.
One of the things to follow on that is just the concept of industry engagement, right? What I've advised people, and this is one of the things I'm going to tell the person I'm going to go see at 1430, right? Is look at how you build a non-competitive advisory board of industry leaders in the business that you're in. I've gone to a couple of these like salon dinners where we'll bring in a couple of key people from government and a whole host of people that are potentially competimates for a dinner to talk about problem solving. You can do that within those agencies. Whether you're the G2 or the DI director or NSA director, you could bring in half a dozen people that are leaders or thought leaders or technology deliverers in your space and go, hey, here's the problems I'm looking at. And they have it in a very non-competitive way, signing non-disclosure, all that good stuff. But I think we have to be a little more left of development and talking to industry about problem resolutions and how do we get after these things? Because we have to think very different about battlefield geometry going forward, and points of presence for intel systems and capabilities. And then the one thing, just going back to one of your initial, questions of Tony, I'll put one of the soft truths out, which is always, irrespective of the software and the capabilities, is people are always more important than hardware, and people are always more important than software. And the ability to optimize all of that stuff is a well-trained soldier, is a well-trained leader, is a well-trained intel professional. Otherwise, everything is always going to be sub-optimized. So we're really about enhancing a highly trained intelligence professional with cutting-edge technology.
Has the battlefield geometry changed given the pace of industrial progress? For example, our nation is at a relative increase of combat operations throughout the world, various locations. This goes through our history. There's a more active moment today. At the same time that there is a onslaught of new automation and autonomy and AI, completely irrespective of the U.S. military. There's industrial moments in human history that happens to be at the same time of combat operations. The speed of industry and the speed of military operations is a long sought after conflict in terms of iteration and communications. But I'm curious about that geometry. I'll say from some recent experience, there's a lot of experimentation in combat operations today. New gear, newly capable, forward, Secretary of War leadership, a lot of new capabilities going forward. And yet, as is the case with young warfighters, they were trained on gear from some months or years ago. And there's a cycle time there, but if the geometry of I'm forward learning things, but then the people back are being trained on something else behind the rear, by the time they go out there, the capabilities have shifted. Yeah, it's an over analyzed comment to say that the speed of innovation doesn't match the speed of requirements. That's well covered. But I'm curious about whether that geometry needs to change as you've seen it. Is there something where 10% faster is just not going to cut it? That's fundamentally something more revolutionary in terms of innovation cycle times or that communication, or even humans before hardware. The humans are not going to trust something they just got. That's not how trust works. It takes time to trust something. But if they have to move faster, how do you build trust in the people that take it forward? I see a collision there that I cannot reconcile. What are your thoughts on where we are today?
Yeah, so Ian, for me, and Bob will probably remember this. So out at Fort Huachuca, where you're training the young soldiers from private all the way up to colonel as you do pre-command courses, in the institution, the institution is always the last organization to get the new equipment that's out in the field that the field is using. So the soldier in the institution who hasn't arrived at their unit yet is training on something, as you said, was years older, sometimes decades older. And so what we tried to do with TRADOC, Training Doctrine Command, was get the institution fielded at the same time that the units were getting fielded. So we had the same equipment in the schoolhouse. We made some headway on that, but the problem is, of course, the production line of the new kit. And of course, everybody wants it in the field, vice in the institution. But if you've got soldiers that are being trained on the old gear, they arrive at the new unit and they've got the new equipment, the soldier doesn't know what to do with the new equipment. So that's the kind of OODA loop we were in. And so this live virtual constructive training at the schoolhouse is so important, to have a virtual trainer where I can sit behind, my desk and do maintenance or set up my system that I'm going to have when I get to my new unit, and it's virtual. At least I've seen part of it. Okay. And then my NCO can train me hands on when I get to the unit. But at least I have some knowledge of what I'm looking at. And I have some familiarity of, this red cable goes in here and the blue cable goes there to set up, And so the schoolhouse is really jumping through hoops to try to make that connection quicker, where systems that the soldiers are using in the field being taught at the schoolhouse, even if it has to be virtual. Scale for the Army's so large, of course, larger than any other service. To scale out the equipment takes a lot of resources, in which, everybody's fighting for right now. But when you add, airland battle and transferred, now we're multi-domain operations, adding space and cyber. And as Bob mentioned, any domain can be attacked at any time. Multiple domains is absolutely how it's going to play out. Technology is moving so fast, we can't keep up with everything. And it scared me last week. I read this article about an AI bot that took down a company in less than 24 hours because somebody gave it parameters, but, walked away from it overnight, and the bot had taken down the company. And I was like, holy cow. It wasn't even a person that did it. The bot did it just with the parameters that been given.
Well, but in balance and banter, there was also a story. I won't name the company. New York Times has a good article on it. A long sought Bay Area dinner debate was which company will be the first $1 billion company with one employee. That has happened. As a healthcare company. There's a guy that achieved $1 billion of revenue, not valuation, revenue, one employee. He's apparently is going quite well, but he was so allegedly lonely, he hired his brother because he was so tired of working alone. So you can have a destructive economic event from a lack of control. You can also have extraordinary value creation with a hyper-enabled operator being one dude working out of it for a $20,000 or $40,000 opening investment. I think the spectrum of possibility is the balance of that risk. And then, so that's what I'm saying. There's goods and bads, right, from this transformation. I'm curious, as we run off on time here, there's the story about quantum is interesting that Bob shared, because while the confusion for the applicability was a surprise, I would also call a lot of that deep tech invention basic science. It's not applied, it's foundational. We don't know exactly what it's going to create, but there'll be apps, derivatives, services that are built on top of foundational breakthroughs. Honestly, I think at least in AI, we can go there a little bit. That may be part of what happened here. The success of companies like NVIDIA was not an applied research. It was foundational research with graphical processor units for video games, combined with the accident of transformers in a software coding. It's those two independent foundational research elements that came together to fuel what we now call AI and chatbots and all of these things. That was not known at the time. That was an accident of history that has led to this transformative amount of invention and this massive enterprise values and all the millions of people using these new tools every single day. So I think, so my point of that, I'm thinking about what does that mean? It was an accident. It wasn't we couldn't have known that. Was my point of that anecdote. And so if we couldn't have known that these types of technologies were going to be introduced, there wasn't a requirement for a chatbot 10 years ago. The same way, it would have been ridiculous. There's no way to know that. I'm curious about the lessons we're learning from today's conflicts. There's an old allegation that America learns more from other people's wars than from our own. I'm curious about the lessons learned from today's conflicts and from your perspective now in transition, having seen more of what's outside the Army. Any thoughts about what those that are still serving in the Army should seek to learn from? It move faster, think harder. Well, we're going to try their best. That's not going to go very far. Well, where can some of these in transition? Where do you see some of the opportunities for those that are still serving in uniform? Where should they be learning from? How can they be taking some of these lessons to get ahead of some of these surprises in the marketplace?
Everything is going to be probably a little bit different in each theater of war. You can't take what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, pop it down in the Middle East. And the key point there is the TTPs and the lessons learned. Okay, we're learning lessons. Okay, and I say actually it's observations from Russia and Ukraine. It's probably not a lesson learned yet because that's over time and history. But as you look at what's going on, you talk about battlefield transparency, you talk about mobility, you talk about combat power preservation. You talk about changes in the operations process that Bob was talking about, the battlefield geometry that we talked about earlier, information flow, decisive decision advantage, decision making. All of that's changing. Do you need ground launched effects? Do you need air launched effects? And so all that technology goes back to the point of how do you employ it for the fight that you're in, okay? And it's going to be different in each theater. And so you can't really have doctrine because it's all going to be different. What's going to happen in Indo-PACOM, South China Sea, Taiwan, is totally different from Iran, Israel, U.S., Hezbollah, Israel, etc. It's all different. And it's the fight that you're in and how you employ it. What we have to do is keep up with the pace of technology to our best ability to be able to integrate that into our concept of operations, I believe. And it's, everybody's looking at a different problem set, and, thinking about what the Army's doing right now, ex Brunson in USFK, thinking about last week when North Korea changed their, doctrine that if KJU is assassinated, they're going nuclear, right? All these things, goes to the VUCA environment that we're living in today, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And Bob mentioned ambiguity a while ago of everything that's going on. And I think we're probably at a period, as you talked earlier, Ian, about there's so much conflict going on around the world. It's probably worse than it's been since World War II. With everything that's going on. And man, how do you keep up with it all, right?
The customization is key point is something that I think most of my colleagues in the entrepreneurial venture defense tech space aren't thinking about. I don't think enough of my colleagues are thinking about TTP. I think at best they're trying to keep up with doctrine and just trying to translate it from the Army to the Navy. But I think it's with self-reflection, but also just broadly because it's just so expensive to customize a car to 17 different colors for different markets. But that is ultimately the need of this large organization, is that there are different requirements effectively for each area. It's almost that should be the starting point, is assuming customization, narrowing, refinement of TTPs per user or at command and area of operation that's not enough. That's an inconvenient truth for a lot of defense tech, industrial base operators. That is really what's needed at scale. So I think that was the source of my question, is that I mean, thank you for answering that, because I didn't have a good myself understanding of that until you explained it as you did. We're running up on time here, so I'll give the floor to those that have opened trails before me. Thank you again so much, D gentlemen, for your mentorship, for your coaching, and for the opportunity here to learn a little bit about how defense is being disrupted.
I just looked at my watch and I'm 105 days out of uniform. And I would say that what I'm finding is people actually want to help more than just making a lot of money. They want to help. They want to contribute to national security, and they actually listen. I was at that event that I talked about in Fuse with 10 different companies, and of course they want some investment in their companies, but they're trying to solve problems that they heard about from soldiers or leaders who were at an event and gave a keynote address, and they listed problems that they had, and that company says, I want to help solve that, and I'm going to invest some of my money from the company as the initial seed corn to see what I can do to solve that problem. And they're so engaging, but they just don't know how the soldier or the unit might want to use it or employ it. And so helping translate, that information is what they're looking for, because a lot of the tech geeks, the teenager who's sitting on the couch developing the system or whatever, has no idea what the soldier does or what the soldier deals with. And so I think, as you talked about, bringing those two organizations together more so, the fact that the big primes, in my mind, the big primes can't move as fast as the Army needs them to move. And smaller companies and startups can do that because they're hungry. Big primes may not be hungry. And if a big prime person watches this, yep, I said it, a big prime maybe doesn't move as fast as we should. And it's exciting to see that coming together between the military with their problem, with a company who wants to help solve the problem. And I mean, just look at, the president's visit to China. I think he took 30 CEOs of the largest companies in the world, and yep, they want to do investment and they want to, make money, but they went to try to help solve problems, I believe, for each of the countries involved. So I think, to your point, we want to protect the nation. I think there's a lot of companies out there that want to do that. They just want to know how to help, and all you got to do is give them a little bit of information and help them lead them in the right direction, and they can do that. It's fascinating to watch. Whether it's at an event like Fuse, whether it's just talking to people about what Turbine One's doing, whether it's talking to academia and how academia wants to help the nation solve problems and support national security. There's a lot of excitement there. So that's what I've seen over 100 days, other than going through 478 boxes of stuff from 17 different moves and 36 years in the Army.
Oh my goodness. Well, gentlemen, we're at time. I wanted to, we'll just have to find another opportunity for Tony to grill his old friend Bob. But I think Tony had the last word there, and as well said. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on this podcast today. I personally learned something about how I'm going to change my job today based on what we're talking about. And I'm sure there's a few key insights that would be valuable for others. So on behalf of the community of folks watching this, retired Lieutenant General Tony Hale and retired Lieutenant General Bob Ashley. Bob and Tony, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.